A homeless man was slapped in a courtroom, but seconds later, he not only stood up to the cops, he took the judge's seat and exposed a web of corruption that shocked an entire city. Hey everyone! Today's story is absolutely insane. Imagine this. A homeless man gets slapped in a courtroom, but what happens next will blow your mind. He stands up, takes the judge's seat, and exposes a shocking web of corruption that no one saw coming. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss an unbelievable story like this. Let's dive in. The sound of the slap echoed through the grand courtroom like a thunderclap. For a moment, everything froze, the hum of whispered conversations, the shuffle of papers, even the gavel in Judge Williams's hand. All eyes turned toward the center of the room, where a homeless man with worn boots and a weather-beaten face stood silently, his cheek stinging red from the force of Officer Miller's hand. The audience gasped in disbelief. Some people half rose from their seats, others covered their mouths. It wasn't just the slap, it was where it had happened. A courtroom, the very place where justice was supposed to prevail, had just become a stage for humiliation. Officer Miller, tall and broad-shouldered in his crisp blue uniform, sneered as he shoved the man back toward the defendant's chair. "Sit down, trash!" he growled, his voice carrying across the hushed chamber. The homeless man, David Carter, did not sit. Instead, he lifted his head slowly, eyes calm, face unshaken except for the faint red mark across his cheek. His beard was unkempt, his clothes old and tattered, but his posture carried a dignity that did not match his appearance. For a second, his gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned crowd, then Officer Miller's smug expression, and finally the polished bench where Judge Williams sat, watching with irritation rather than outrage. Judge Williams rapped his gavel lazily. "Order in the court," he said, his tone impatient. "Officer, control this man. We don't have all day." David's voice, low but steady, broke the silence. "Order," he repeated, his words slow and deliberate. "You talk about order, Your Honor. Yet in your courtroom, injustice speaks louder than law." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The audacity of a ragged man speaking back to a judge in such calm authority was shocking. From the press box, a young reporter named Emily Brooks leaned forward, her pen trembling slightly above her notepad. She had covered hundreds of hearings in New York City, but never had she seen something like this. There was something in David's tone, not desperation, not fear, but confidence. The kind of voice that once commanded authority. Officer Miller shoved David again. "Shut your mouth before I—" "Before you what?" David interrupted, his eyes suddenly sharp. He turned toward the officer, and for the first time his voice carried real weight. "Before you break another law in a place where law is supposed to be sacred? Do you even know what contempt of court truly means, officer?" Gasps filled the room. People whispered to each other, startled by the way he spoke, not like a homeless man, not like a desperate defendant, but like someone who had once owned the room. Judge Williams narrowed his eyes. "You dare lecture my officer?" he asked coldly. David's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "Not a lecture, Your Honor. Just a reminder of the rules you pretend to uphold." Emily scribbled furiously in her notebook. Who was this man? His diction was precise, his knowledge uncanny. A man who looked like he hadn't slept under a roof in months was suddenly quoting courtroom decorum like he had written the book himself. Officer Miller's face flushed red. He raised his hand again, but this time David didn't flinch. Instead, David's calm, unwavering gaze froze the officer mid-motion, as if silently daring him to strike again in front of the whole city's eyes. For the first time, doubt flickered across Miller's expression. The silence was broken by a sharp clatter. Everyone's eyes shifted to the clerk's desk, where a heavy folder had slipped off the pile and spilled open across the polished wood floor. Papers scattered, sliding toward the jury box. The top sheet faced upward, bold black letters, visible even from a distance. Emily squinted and read the name aloud under her breath. Honorable David Carter, New York Supreme Court. Her pen slipped from her fingers. Her heart pounded. The homeless man, the one who had just been slapped in open court, wasn't just anyone. He had once been a judge, and not just any judge, David Carter, a name she faintly remembered from years ago, before his sudden disappearance from the legal world. She remembered headlines about a scandal, corruption, whispers of betrayal, but she had thought he was dead, or gone forever. Now here he was, standing in rags, red cheek burning, yet speaking like the bench still belonged to him. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Jurors exchanged stunned glances. Even the bailiff froze mid-step, staring at the papers on the floor. Judge Williams's face tightened. He leaned forward, his voice dangerously low. That name means nothing here. He's no judge. He's a disgrace who lost everything. Do not let him fool you. David finally turned his full attention to Williams, his eyes burning with quiet fire. I may have lost my home. I may have lost my wealth. I may even have lost my reputation. But what I did not lose was my oath to the law. His voice carried through the courtroom like a blade cutting through smoke. For the first time, Judge Williams looked unsettled. Emily Brooks pressed record on her phone, her instincts screaming that this moment was bigger than anything she had ever covered. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were staring at the man who moments ago had been dismissed as a nobody. And for the first time since the slap, the power in the courtroom shifted. The room trembled with whispers, every corner of the courtroom buzzing with disbelief. The name on those scattered papers, Honorable David Carter, hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Officer Miller bent down quickly, snatching the papers off the floor, shoving them back into the folder as if covering up a crime. His jaw clenched tight. This is nothing. Old files, trash. Don't pay attention, he barked at the crowd, but his voice betrayed unease. David Carter, however, remained standing, his torn coat hanging loosely from his shoulders, his hands calmly resting on the table in front of him. The red mark on his cheek burned brightly under the harsh courtroom lights, but his eyes were steady. He spoke softly, yet his words carried across the room. You can hide papers, officer, but you cannot hide truth. The audience gasped again. A man in the gallery muttered, "He talks like a judge," another whispered. Wasn't Carter the one who vanished after the corruption scandal? I thought he died. There is no Vand. Judge Williams slammed his gavel, his face flushed with irritation. Silence. Enough of this nonsense. This man is no judge. He is a fraud who disgraced this court years ago. And now he dares to walk back in here, a beggar in rags, pretending to lecture us? David turned his gaze on Williams, calm as ever. Pretending, he asked, his voice rising just enough to pierce the silence. Or reminding you of what justice used to mean before men like you poisoned it? The words landed like a dagger. Williams's eyes narrowed, but he didn't answer. Emily Brooks gripped her pen so tightly it nearly snapped. She couldn't tear her eyes away. This wasn't just a homeless man defending himself. This was a man challenging power itself, and the authority in his tone was undeniable. Officer Miller stepped forward again, puffing out his chest. You don't get to talk like that! You're nothing but dirt under my boots. One word from the judge and I'll drag you out of here in chains. David didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto Miller's with unblinking precision. Then do it, he said. But before you take another step, ask yourself, do you know what happens to an officer who commits contempt of court in front of sworn witnesses? Do you know the penalties, the disciplinary action, the record that will follow you for life? Miller froze. The words weren't shouted, but they struck harder than any punch. He glanced uncertainly at Judge Williams, as if looking for guidance. The judge scowled. Don't listen to him, Miller. He has no authority here. But the hesitation was already there. The courtroom saw it. The balance of power was shifting not through force, but through knowledge. David straightened his posture, his ragged coat falling open to reveal a worn tie, the last remnant of a life once polished. He addressed the court, his voice clear and commanding now. "I stand here in rags, yes. I stand here without home, without wealth, stripped of the comforts you all cling to. But strip away a man's possessions, and what remains? His words, his honor, his oath. And my oath, ladies and gentlemen, was to the law of this land. I never broke it. The men who sit in high chairs and wear polished robes did." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the jury sat rigid, as though afraid to breathe. Emily's pulse raced as she scribbled furiously in her notebook. "Homeless man speaks like a judge. Accuses system of betrayal." Crowd listening. Judge Williams slammed his gavel again. Harder this time, his voice cracking with barely contained rage. "Enough! You dare question me, a sitting judge? You are finished, Carter. You will leave this court in chains, and I will personally ensure no one ever hears your voice again." David's calm demeanor did not waver. He tilted his head, almost pitying the man in robes before him. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "you can silence a man. You can strip him of everything. But you cannot erase the truth of what he has seen, or the knowledge he carries. And every second you try to bury it, more eyes begin to open." He gestured toward the crowd. The gallery of onlookers was no longer scoffing. They were leaning forward, listening with intensity. And Emily, her phone still recording under the table, whispered to herself, "This is history happening in front of me." Officer Miller stepped back uncertainly, his hand twitching near his belt. He wasn't sure whether to restrain David or to protect himself from the storm brewing in the room. The atmosphere shifted like a tide turning. The man who had been slapped, shoved, and mocked just minutes ago was now commanding the entire courtroom not with force, but with presence. David's eyes swept across the faces before him, resting finally on Judge Williams. His voice dropped lower, colder. "You think this is your courtroom, but the law doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. And today, I stand as one of them." The silence was deafening. The crowd held its breath. Then, suddenly, a shout from the back. "Let him speak!" Others joined. "Let him speak. He knows the law better than you." Judge Williams pounded his gavel furiously. "Order! I demand order!" But for the first time that day, order was no longer his to command. David Carter, the man who entered as a homeless vagrant, was no longer just a defendant. He was a presence the entire room could not ignore, and though no one realized it yet, the slap that was meant to humiliate him had only ignited the spark that would set the entire courtroom ablaze. The courtroom was no longer the orderly place it had been when the session began. The crowd was restless, the jurors unsettled, and even the bailiffs seemed uncertain whether to follow Judge Williams's furious gavel or the quiet authority radiating from David Carter. The name Honorable David Carter lingered in the air like an open secret. The papers scattered earlier had been shoved back into their folder, but the damage was done. The whispers had begun. "David Carter? Wasn't he a judge before?" one man in the gallery murmured. "I thought he disappeared years ago. Some scandal, wasn't it?" A woman whispered back. Emily Brooks sat at the edge of her seat, heart pounding as her pen raced across the page. Her reporter's instinct told her she was sitting on a story bigger than any she had ever covered. She remembered faintly the name had surfaced once, years back, in articles about corruption in New York's legal system. A judge who had gone missing overnight, his career ruined by allegations that never seemed fully explained. And now, here he was, standing in rags, defying the very people who had cast him aside. Judge Williams slammed his gavel yet again, his voice booming. "There will be no discussion of ancient history in my court. This man is a criminal and a disgrace, and I will not allow him to distract us with lies." But the murmurs didn't stop. The people in the room were no longer fully listening to him. They were leaning toward David, waiting for him to speak. David's eyes swept the gallery, his expression calm but sharp, as if he felt the weight of every stare. He took a deep breath, then spoke in a measured tone. "You all wonder why a man who once wore the robe now wears rags?" he began. His words carried the weight of a confession, yet also the fire of accusation. You wonder why the name David Carter vanished from the courts of this city. I will tell you why. The crowd leaned in. Even Officer Miller, who had been so eager to silence him before, found himself listening despite his clenched jaw. David's voice grew stronger, every syllable crisp. "Years ago, I presided over cases that touched powerful men. Men who bent the law to serve themselves. I refused to bend with them. And for that, they painted me as corrupt. They manufactured evidence. They staged a scandal so grand the papers ate it up in one day. And in a single night, the judge who stood in their way was erased." Gasps rippled across the room. Emily's pen stopped. She lifted her phone instead, recording his words directly now. This wasn't just a courtroom scene, it was history being revealed. Judge Williams's face darkened. "Lies!" he spat, slamming his gavel so hard the sound cracked like a gunshot. "You destroyed yourself, Carter. You gambled, you took bribes, and when the system exposed you, you ran like the coward you are." David turned toward Williams slowly, his eyes blazing but his voice still controlled. "If I had taken bribes, show the proof. If I had gambled, show the records. You can't, because none exist. But what does exist are the men who profited from my fall. And one of them," his gaze sharpened, "is sitting right where you are now." The courtroom erupted. People gasped. Some shouted, and the bailiffs stepped forward, unsure whether to silence David or protect him. Judge Williams' hand shook as he pointed toward David. "Remove him! Remove him immediately!" he shouted, his voice cracking with fury. But before anyone could move, David raised his hand not in threat, but as if to command silence. And to everyone's surprise, the room quieted again, as though compelled by the authority in his gesture. He spoke softer now, but his words were piercing. "You can strip a man of his robe, his home, his dignity, but you cannot strip him of memory. And I remember every deal, every shadow, every betrayal that stole my life away. The truth has waited long enough, and the truth always finds its way back to light." The murmurs began again, but this time they weren't whispers of doubt, they were whispers of belief. People were beginning to see the possibility that this wasn't a delusional man in rags, but the victim of something far larger. Emily Brooks felt her chest tighten with excitement and fear. If what David was saying was true, then Judge Williams wasn't just an arrogant man with a gavel, he was part of a system that had deliberately destroyed another judge to protect its own. She glanced around. Phones were out now. Members of the audience were recording, streaming. The world beyond the courtroom was starting to listen. Judge Williams realized it too. His face twisted with panic beneath his rage. "Turn off those phones! This court is adjourned!" he shouted, hammering his gavel like a desperate man. But it was too late. The story had left the courtroom. And David Carter, the man who was meant to be forgotten, was remembered again. His past was no longer a shadow. It was alive, pulsing through the room, and soon it would consume everyone who had tried to bury it. The air in the courtroom had grown heavy, electric with tension. Judge Williams's gavel pounded again and again, but each strike seemed weaker than the last, like a desperate attempt to hold on to power that was slipping through his fingers. "Silence!" he roared. "This is my courtroom. I will not allow this circus to continue another second." But the audience didn't silence. Their whispers rolled like waves, louder with every echo. Phones were out, lenses gleamed, and the live feeds had already left the walls of the courtroom. Somewhere out there, beyond the courthouse, people were hearing the words of David Carter, words they were never meant to hear. Officer Miller, fists clenched, stepped forward again, towering over David. His jaw was tight with fury. "That's enough, old man," he snarled. "You're coming with me. Now!" The crowd hushed instantly, the weight of the moment pressing on everyone's chest. David didn't move. He simply turned his head, his sharp gaze locking on Miller's. Touch me again, officer, he said quietly, and you'll not only be guilty of assault, but contempt of court committed in front of 24 witnesses, on camera, and in violation of your sworn duty. Miller froze. His breath came in harsh bursts, but his boots felt glued to the floor. The words hung in the air like chains wrapping around him. David took one slow step forward, his ragged coat brushing against his knees. You wear that uniform, he continued, his voice steady, but you forgot what it means. You swore an oath to serve and protect the people, not to humiliate them, not to silence them, and certainly not to strike them when they stand defenseless. The audience erupted into murmurs of agreement. A woman near the back shouted, "He's right!" Another voice joined. "Let him speak!" Judge Williams's face turned crimson. "Order! I command order!" His voice cracked, almost drowned by the rising chants. He slammed his gavel again, but it no longer carried authority. It sounded hollow. Emily Brooks's fingers trembled as she adjusted her phone camera. The live stream counter on her screen was skyrocketing. Thousands of viewers. Tens of thousands. The world was watching now. Williams turned his fury back to David. You dare stand there and lecture us as though you belong here? You are nothing. A disgrace. This city spat you out for good reason, and I will not let you crawl back from the gutter to poison it again. David's eyes narrowed, his calm expression finally cracking into something sharper, harder. If I am nothing, he said, his voice cutting through the noise, then why do my words carry more weight than your gavel? If I am a disgrace, then why does this crowd believe me more than their sitting judge? If I crawled from the gutter, then ask yourself, Judge Williams, who put me there? The crowd exploded. Gasps, shouts, applause, it all collided into one storm of sound. The bailiffs stepped forward uncertainly, torn between silencing David or protecting him from the fury of their own judge. Judge Williams's hand shook as he pointed at David. Enough! You think you can expose me? You think you can destroy this court with your lies? I will bury you so deep, no one will ever remember your name again. David took another step forward, standing tall despite the rags that hung from his shoulders. He lifted his chin and met Williams's eyes with unwavering defiance. You already tried, he said. His voice dropped lower, colder. And yet, here I stand. The audience roared. Phones rose higher, flashes burst, and the chant began again. Let him speak! Let him speak! Emily's heart raced as she whispered into her recorder. The tide has turned. The judge is losing control. David Carter is taking it back. Officer Miller, still frozen, turned to Williams. Judge, what do we do? His voice was barely audible, but the crowd caught it. A cop, uncertain. A judge, unraveling. The sight was almost surreal. Williams slammed the gavel one last time, the sound splintering. You will sit down, he screamed at David. You will obey this court, or you will rot in a cell until your bones turn to dust. David shook his head slowly, almost pitying the man before him. His reply was calm, almost too calm. You mistake this courtroom for yours, Williams. But it belongs to the law, and the law belongs to the people. The roar of the crowd was deafening now. People stood on their feet, clapping, shouting. Bailiffs struggled to maintain order. But even they looked conflicted, glancing between the man in rags and the man in robes. And then, as though fate itself was watching, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open. A messenger in a black suit stepped inside, holding a sealed envelope. The noise dimmed instantly as all eyes turned to him. He approached the clerk's desk, handed over the envelope, and whispered something quickly before stepping back. The clerk, pale-faced, broke the seal and scanned the letter. Her hands trembled. She looked up at Judge Williams, then at David, then back at the audience. Her voice was quiet at first, but the microphone carried it clearly through the room. An emergency order has been issued from the Chief Justice's office. Effective immediately, a temporary replacement judge must preside over this courtroom due to conflict of interest. The crowd erupted. Gasps and shouts filled the chamber. Williams's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. David Carter didn't move. He simply lifted his head, his eyes burning with the calm fire of a man who knew this moment was coming. The clerk's voice trembled as she read the next line. By record and eligibility, the designated replacement is Honorable David Carter. The room exploded. Shouts, applause, disbelief. Phones shot higher into the air, capturing every second. And for the first time in years, the man who had been broken, beaten, and forgotten felt the weight of destiny settling back on his shoulders. David Carter, once a homeless outcast, had just been named judge of the very courtroom where he had been slapped. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Every person inside the courtroom, every officer, every reporter, every member of the public was frozen in stunned silence as the clerk's trembling voice echoed, "Honorable David Carter is the designated replacement judge." It was as if time itself had broken. The homeless man who had been slapped just minutes ago was now, by order of the Chief Justice, being elevated to the highest authority in the room. Gasps turned into shouts. Applause clashed with disbelief. Reporters scrambled to capture every angle, their fingers flying across screens. Live stream chats exploded with messages. "This is history! A homeless man is now the judge? Justice is alive!" Judge Williams's face had drained of color, his once commanding posture crumbling as if the weight of the moment had crushed him. This is outrageous!" he bellowed. His voice cracked. "This is fraud! A trick! He's disbarred! He's finished!" But the clerk, pale and shaking, held up the official seal. "The order comes directly from the Chief Justice. It is binding, immediate, and final. David Carter is recognized as the temporary presiding judge of this court." The sound that followed shook the room. A thunder of applause erupted from the public benches. People leapt to their feet, cheering, shouting his name. "Carter! Carter! Carter!" Officer Miller took an uncertain step toward Williams. "Judge, the order's real," he muttered, eyes darting nervously. "It's signed. We can't ignore it," Williams snapped, spinning on him with venom. "You shut your mouth! You're supposed to protect me, not—" But his tirade was drowned out as two bailiffs approached David. Their eyes were hesitant, but respectful. "Sir," one of them said, bowing slightly. "By procedure, you'll need to take the bench." David's chest tightened. His heart pounded against his ribs. For years, he had been nothing but a shadow on the streets, invisible, unwanted. And now, the bench, the very symbol of justice he had been torn away from, was being offered back to him. He swallowed hard, but his voice was steady. "Very well," he said. The crowd erupted again as the bailiffs guided him forward. Each step toward the judge's bench felt like reclaiming a piece of his soul. His tattered shoes tapped against the polished floor, his ragged coat brushing against marble walls that once knew his authority. Emily Brooks was crying behind her camera. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks, her voice shaking as she narrated live. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can barely believe what I'm seeing. David Carter, once disgraced, once abandoned, has just been summoned to the bench. This is history in motion. This is justice rewriting itself before our eyes." When David reached the steps of the bench, he paused. The entire room seemed to inhale with him. His fingers brushed the edge of the polished wood, the same bench from which he had been cast down years ago. He turned to the audience, his eyes scanning the faces, some in awe, some in tears, some still in disbelief. Then, slowly, he climbed the steps. The gavel sat on the bench, glinting under the lights. The same gavel Williams had slammed so arrogantly moments earlier. David reached out, his hand hovering over it. The crowd hushed instantly. Even Williams's furious protests fell silent as all eyes locked on him. And then he picked it up. The sound of the gavel striking wood thundered like a cannon shot. "Court is now in session," David declared, his voice booming with authority. The room exploded into chaos. Cheers, sobs, chants it all blurred together. Cameras flashed, live stream numbers skyrocketed. Outside the courthouse, crowds began to gather, drawn by the storm of news spreading through the city. Williams stumbled forward, his voice trembling with rage. You can't do this. You're nothing but a washed-up—" David slammed the gavel again, the sound cutting him off like a blade. "Silence, Williams. You forget yourself. You are no longer in charge here. And before this session ends, your crimes, your corruption, and your lies will be laid bare for all to see." The audience roared in approval. Even the bailiffs, standing stiffly at the sides, looked as if they were resisting the urge to applaud. Williams's lips trembled. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. He could see it, his empire of lies crumbling, his grip on power slipping away like sand through his fingers. David leaned forward, eyes burning with fire. "For years, you tried to bury me. You stripped me of my title, my dignity, my life. But justice is not so easily killed. Today, it rises again." Emily's voice cracked as she whispered to her camera. "This isn't just a trial anymore. It's a reckoning." The crowd chanted louder than ever. "Carter! Carter! Carter!" And as the noise thundered around him, David Carter, once homeless, once broken, sat tall in the judge's seat, the weight of justice heavy but righteous on his shoulders. For the first time in years, the court belonged to the truth again. The gavel still echoed in the air like thunder rolling across the courtroom. David Carter sat tall behind the bench, his ragged coat draped awkwardly over the seat that once again belonged to him. His hands rested firmly on the polished wood, steady as stone, as if the years of exile had only sharpened his sense of justice. Judge Williams, still trembling with outrage, pointed a shaking finger. "This is madness. You think you can undo everything with a piece of paper? You are finished, Carter. You were finished years ago." David's eyes locked on him, calm yet unyielding. "Sit down, Williams," he said. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of 1,000 storms. "You are no longer the one giving orders." The crowd gasped at his defiance. Williams hesitated, his face twitching between fury and fear. He finally sank into his chair like a man being forced into his own grave. David turned his gaze to the audience. "This court has long been a place of justice," he declared. "But justice has been twisted, bent to serve greed and corruption. Today, that ends." Phones raised higher. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Emily Brooks's live stream counter ticked past 100,000 viewers, her voice breaking as she narrated. David Carter is taking control. He's putting Judge Williams himself on trial. David leaned forward. "Clerk, bring the evidence." The clerk, still pale but resolute, shuffled nervously through a folder. Her hands trembled as she pulled out documents, bank transfers, case files, transcripts. She placed them before David. David lifted one sheet. His voice rang out. "Exhibit A, case file number 3471. People versus Howard. The defendant was guilty beyond doubt, yet Judge Williams dismissed the case. Why?" The crowd hushed, waiting. David slammed the paper on the desk. "Because Williams received $200,000 from Howard's corporation the week before trial." Gasps erupted. Reporters nearly fell over themselves, typing. Emily whispered into her camera. "Corruption. Bribery. It's all coming out." Williams shot up from his chair. "Lies! Fabricated evidence! He's framing me!" David raised the gavel and slammed it down hard. "Silence! You will speak only when addressed!" His voice roared like fire, and for the first time, Williams obeyed. David's eyes burned as he held up another file. "Exhibit B, transcripts of witness intimidation, carried out by officers under your command. People threatened, evidence destroyed, innocent lives ruined." The audience shouted in anger, fists pounding against benches. "Shame! Shame!" Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably. Sweat ran down his forehead, He had been part of those orders, part of that corruption. For the first time, doubt gnawed at his chest. David turned his gaze directly on Miller. "Officer Miller," he said slowly, "do you deny that Judge Williams ordered you to tamper with evidence in at least 3 cases?" The room froze. All eyes turned to the cop. Miller's lips trembled. He opened his mouth, then shut it, his eyes darting toward Williams. Williams glared at him, silently demanding loyalty, but the weight of the crowd's eyes, the flashing cameras, the chance they pressed harder than Williams's stare ever could. Miller swallowed hard. I was following orders," he muttered. The crowd exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Williams leapt from his chair, screaming, "Traitor, you coward!" David slammed the gavel. "Enough. The truth is all that matters here." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing on Williams. "And the truth is, you built your throne on fear and money. You silenced me because I refused to be part of your empire of corruption." Emily's tears ran freely now. She whispered into her camera, "This is more than a courtroom battle. This is justice rising from the ashes." David rose from his chair, his voice booming like a storm. "Williams, for years, you mocked the law you swore to uphold. You slapped the innocent, you buried the truth, and you tried to destroy anyone who stood in your way. But justice cannot be buried. It cannot be slapped into silence. And today, before this court, before this city, before the world watching live, you will answer for your crimes." The crowd erupted into chants. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Williams's face had gone pale. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His hands shook as he gripped the table, his power crumbling like dust in the wind. David slammed the gavel once more. "This court will hear the case of the people versus Judge Richard Williams." The sound was like an earthquake. The courtroom was no longer his. It was David's. It was the people's. And for the first time in years, the walls of justice echoed with truth. The roar of the crowd still thundered through the courtroom. David Carter sat steady behind the bench, gavel in hand, while Williams looked like a man sinking in quicksand, thrashing, clawing, but sinking deeper with every move. "Lies!" Williams screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. "You forged those documents. He's not a judge, he's a fraud. You're all being manipulated." David's eyes narrowed. "If you are innocent, Williams, then you have nothing to fear from testimony. It is not Clyde Azey and Al-Nasside." He turned toward the audience. "This court calls its first witness, Officer Miller." The crowd shifted, murmuring as Miller stiffened. He looked trapped, sweat dripping down his temples. Williams glared at him with a venomous intensity. Miller swallowed hard, stepping toward the witness stand. His boots echoed against the floor, each step heavier than the last. He lowered himself into the seat, glancing at the bailiffs who swore him in. "Officer Miller," David began, his voice calm but sharp. "Did Judge Williams ever order you to tamper with evidence?" Miller's lips trembled. His eyes darted between David, the cameras, the audience, and Williams. I don't..." His words faltered. David leaned forward. His voice softened, but carried authority. "You are under oath. The world is watching. This is your chance to free yourself from the chains of corruption. Speak the truth, officer." The silence was crushing. Then, with a heavy exhale, Miller spoke. "Yes," his voice cracked. "Yes, he did." The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, phones lifted higher. Reporters shouted over one another. Emily Brooks nearly dropped her camera, her voice breaking as she narrated. "He admitted it. A police officer just confessed to tampering with evidence under orders from Judge Williams himself." Williams leapt from his chair, his face purple with rage. "Liar! You lying coward! You think you can save yourself by betraying me?" Miller's eyes hardened. Years of guilt spilled out in a torrent. "You told me to do it. You told me to destroy files, to threaten witnesses, to silence people. And I did it, because I was afraid of you. But I'm not afraid anymore. Something of the face, way in the quarters by Wilde. The audience roared with approval. Justice! Justice! David slammed the gavel, commanding silence. His eyes locked on Williams. The truth has begun to speak, and it will not be silenced. Williams's chest heaved. His hands shook as he pointed wildly around the room. You're all fools. He's tricked you all. You think this is justice? This is chaos. You can't put a judge on trial in his own courtroom? David's gaze burned. The law is not your throne, Williams. It is the people's shield. And today, that shield has turned against you. The clerk handed David another file, her face pale but resolute. David lifted it high for all to see. Exhibit C. Financial records linking Williams to corporations whose leaders walked free under his gavel. Millions in payoffs. Millions in blood money. The crowd erupted again. Emily's live stream counter surged past 500,000 viewers, the chat exploding. He's done. This is the end for Williams. David Carter is the people's judge. Williams's desperation turned to panic. He pounded his fists on the table. I am the law. Without me, this city falls apart. You'll regret this. David stood, his figure towering despite the rags on his shoulders. You are not the law. You are its betrayal. And the people will not regret watching justice strip away your mask. For the first time, Williams faltered. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but saw none. Even the bailiffs looked at him with contempt. His empire had crumbled in the span of an hour. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back swung open again. A group of suited officials entered representatives from the Chief Justice's office, escorted by federal marshals. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The lead official stepped forward, his voice booming. This proceeding is being monitored at the highest level. Effective immediately, Judge Richard Williams is suspended pending investigation. David Carter will preside over all further proceedings. The courtroom erupted like never before. People stood on their benches, clapping, shouting. Carter! 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 Echoed off the marble walls. Williams staggered backward, his face pale as death. His empire had fallen, not with a quiet whisper, but with the roar of thousands inside the courtroom, outside in the streets, and across the entire nation through live broadcasts. David raised the gavel one more time. His voice boomed above the chaos. Justice does not serve power. Justice serves the people. And today, the people's voice has spoken. The crowd roared in unison, and Williams, once untouchable, looked like nothing more than a man stripped bare before the truth. The thunder of applause still shook the courthouse walls. Outside, the streets were packed with people holding phones in the air, broadcasting the trial live. The world wasn't just watching anymore, it was demanding justice. David Carter gripped the gavel firmly, his voice steady as iron. This court will continue, he said, scanning the sea of faces. The truth has only begun to reveal itself. Williams sat slumped at his table, sweat soaking through his expensive robes. His once commanding glare had turned hollow, desperate. Yet his lips curled in a twisted grin. You think you've won, Carter? You don't know half the story. You don't know what you're up against. David ignored him. He turned to the clerk. Call the next witness. The clerk nodded nervously. The court calls former court clerk, Linda Hayes. Gasps rippled through the room as a middle-aged woman with weary eyes stepped forward. She had once worked under Williams years ago, but had mysteriously resigned. She looked nervous, clutching her handbag tightly, but when her eyes met David's, she drew strength. Miss Hayes, David began, please, tell the court why you resigned from Judge Williams's staff. Her voice trembled, because I couldn't stomach the corruption anymore. Files went missing. Evidence was destroyed. Cases with overwhelming proof were dismissed, all after large donations arrived in Williams's private accounts. The audience hissed with outrage. Cameras zoomed in. Emily Brooks's live stream ticked past 1 million viewers, her voice cracking as she narrated. We're hearing direct testimony from a former insider. This could bury Williams for good. Williams slammed his fist on the table. Lies! She was fired for incompetence! Linda's hands shook, but she lifted a folded paper from her bag. This is my resignation letter, dated and signed, and attached is a copy of an email where you ordered me to shred transcripts from a trial involving Senator Harkins's son. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted over each other, flashing cameras blinding the air. Williams's face went white. David leaned forward. Is this true, Miss Hayes? Did Judge Williams personally instruct you to destroy court records? Yes, she said firmly, tears spilling down her cheeks. And when I refused, he threatened me. He said he could ruin my life the way he ruined yours. Gasps filled the air. All eyes swung back to David. His expression hardened, but his silence spoke volumes. William shot up, his voice shrill. This is a setup! Carter's pulling strings behind the scenes, turning my old staff against me. None of this will stand in a higher court. David slammed the gavel, silencing him. What stands or falls will be determined by truth. Williams, not by your bluster. The clerk approached again, her hands trembling as she passed David another file. His eyes scanned it, and for the first time since taking the bench, his expression faltered. He looked up slowly. The next witness is Daniel Carter. The room froze. A name that hung in the air like lightning. Whispers filled the courtroom. Carter? Another Carter? Emily's voice trembled as she narrated. Could it be someone related to David? The doors creaked open. A young man in his late 20s walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that mirrored David's. His clothes were modest, but his presence commanded attention. David's breath caught. His lips parted in disbelief. Daniel, he whispered. The young man stepped forward, his jaw tight. Hello, Father. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, shouts, cameras clicking like machine guns. The world had just learned that the homeless man turned judge had a son. David gripped the bench, his mind spinning. Years of exile. Years on the streets, he had lost everything, including the boy he once held in his arms. Williams's twisted grin returned. Ah, so the prodigal son returns. Tell them, Daniel. Tell them who your father really island. Daniel turned to the audience, his voice clear. My father was a good man. He taught me that justice meant protecting the weak, standing up for the truth. But Williams destroyed him. He framed him, cast him out, made us live in shame. Tears glistened in David's eyes. Daniel's voice hardened. Williams came to me when I was 15. He told me my father was a disgrace. He told me to forget him, or he would ruin my future. And I believed him. I turned my back on my own blood because of that man. The crowd gasped again, fury boiling in their voices. Monster! Someone shouted at Williams. Williams's mask cracked, rage twisting his features. You ungrateful little brat! You were nothing without me. I gave you everything, schools, connections. No, Daniel interrupted, his voice thunderous. You gave me chains. My father gave me courage. And now, the world knows the truth. The audience erupted into applause, so deafening it shook the windows. Emily sobbed openly on camera. Ladies and gentlemen, we're witnessing not just justice, but reconciliation. A father and son, torn apart by corruption, standing together again. David could barely speak. His voice broke as he whispered, I thought I'd lost you forever. Daniel's jaw clenched, tears brimming. You didn't lose me, Dad. William stole me. But I'm here now. And I'll help you finish this. The crowd cheered louder, chanting David's name. Carter! 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 William stumbled back, his empire crumbling, his lies unraveling. And now his last weapon family, had turned against him. David raised the gavel high. His voice boomed across the chamber. The truth is no longer buried. It lives in every voice here. And Williams, your reckoning has only just begun. The gavel struck wood, echoing like the sound of destiny itself. The chants of "Carter! Carter!" thundered through the courthouse like a wave crashing against stone. The walls trembled with the power of the people's voice. For the first time in decades, justice felt alive within these walls. But amid the roar, Judge Williams's eyes gleamed with something darker than defeat. His empire was crumbling, his reputation shredded, his secrets spilling like blood in the water, but men like Williams never surrendered quietly. He leaned forward, gripping the table with trembling hands. "You fools think this is over?" His voice cut through the chants like a blade. "You think justice has been served because a disgraced beggar sits in my chair? You have no idea what forces are at play." The crowd jeered, but Williams's lips twisted into a grin. He reached inside his robe. The bailiffs rushed forward, but too late, his hand emerged clutching a sleek black pistol. Screams erupted. The crowd ducked for cover. Reporters dove behind benches, cameras tumbling to the ground but still recording. Emily Brooks's live stream jolted violently, the screen shaking as she gasped. "He's armed! Judge Williams is armed!" Williams's face was flushed with madness. He waved the gun wildly, eyes darting between David and Daniel. "All of you, sit down, now, or I swear I'll paint these walls red!" The room froze in terror. Mothers shielded their children. Clerks pressed against the walls. The chanting ceased instantly, replaced by the pounding of 100 hearts. David rose slowly from the bench, his hands raised. "Williams," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Put the gun down. It's over. You've lost." "Lost?" Williams barked a laugh, but it was hollow, desperate. "No, Carter. You don't understand. You've stumbled into a world that will eat you alive. I'm not the root of this corruption. I'm only a branch. Cut me down, and the roots will still strangle this city." His eyes flicked to Daniel. "And you, boy. I gave you a future. I could have made you a king. But instead, you choose a broken man who couldn't even protect you when it mattered?" Daniel stepped forward, fearless despite the trembling gun pointed at him. His voice was steel. "You didn't give me a future, you stole my past. You made me hate the man who loved me. That ends today." Williams's hand shook, his finger tightening on the trigger. Gasps filled the courtroom. Then bang! A shot rang out. Screams filled the chamber. Reporters ducked. For a heartbeat, time froze. But the bullet hadn't hit David. It hadn't hit Daniel. Instead, it buried itself in the wooden panel of the bench, inches from David's arm. Williams's aim had faltered. His hand trembled violently. Sweat streamed down his face. Before he could fire again, Daniel lunged. In one swift move, he knocked the gun aside and tackled Williams to the ground. The weapon clattered across the marble floor, sliding beneath the jury box. The crowd erupted into cheers. Bailiff surged forward, wrestling Williams into cuffs. His face was red with fury, spittle flying from his mouth as he screamed. "You idiots! Do you think arresting me changes anything? The people I work for, they'll crush you all! Carter, your son. Your name. They'll burn it to ash." David descended from the bench, his robe flowing behind him like a mantle of judgment. He stood over Williams, breathing heavy but unshaken. "You've hidden behind power for too long. Today, the mask is gone. The world sees you for what you are, a coward who hides behind threats and lies." The crowd roared, fists pumping in the air. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Emily Brooks, tears streaming down her cheeks, spoke to her live stream audience of nearly 2 million now. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is history. The man who terrorized this courtroom for years has been disarmed by the very people he tried to silence, and the world is watching." Williams struggled against the bailiffs, his voice hoarse from screaming. "You'll regret this, Carter. The truth you seek, it will destroy you too. You don't know what's buried in your past. David froze at the words. His chest tightened. A murmur swept through the room. Daniel frowned, looking at his father. What does he mean? David's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing on Williams. More lies. That's all he has left. But in his heart, a shadow stirred. Could there be another secret one even he didn't know? The bailiffs dragged Williams toward the exit, but he kept thrashing, shouting over the crowd. You think this is justice? This is nothing. The true puppeteers will come for you, Carter. And when they do, your son will suffer like you did. David's fist tightened, but he held his ground. He wouldn't give Williams the satisfaction of seeing him shaken. Instead, he turned to the crowd. The fight for truth doesn't end with one man's downfall. Justice is not a moment, it's a flame. And together, we will keep it burning. The courthouse exploded with applause. Reporters stood on benches, streaming every second. Around the world, millions chanted David's name. Daniel placed a hand on his father's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Whatever comes next, we face it together. David looked at his son, pride and sorrow mixing in his eyes. He nodded firmly. Together. But even as the people cheered, even as Williams was dragged away in chains, David couldn't shake the echo of his enemy's words. The truth you seek, it will destroy you too. A storm was still coming. And the final reckoning was only a heartbeat away. The courthouse buzzed like a beehive, the air heavy with both relief and unease. Williams had been dragged out in chains, but his words lingered like smoke after a fire. The truth you seek, it will destroy you too. David Carter stood behind the judge's bench, the gavel still in his hand. He scanned the faces of the crowd reporters, citizens, police officers, mothers clutching children, and saw something he hadn't seen in years: hope. Yet beneath that hope, he sensed fear. Emily Brooks's live stream counter ticked past 3 million viewers. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke into the camera. America has witnessed history today, but this story isn't over yet. The heavy doors opened once more, and the Chief Justice's representatives strode inside. The lead official carried a folder thick with documents, stamped with federal seals. He approached David with solemn respect. "Mr. Carter," the man said, his voice echoing in the hushed room. "We've been monitoring this trial. We've also been investigating Williams for years, but he was always untouchable. Thanks to your courage, the dam has broken." He placed the folder on the bench. David opened it slowly, his breath catching. Inside were names, dozens of them. Judges, CEOs, politicians, officers, each one tied to bribes, cover-ups, and blood money. The room gasped as David read the list aloud. This is bigger than Williams. This is an empire of corruption." The official nodded grimly. "And Williams was just one of their pawns. But now, with the evidence you've brought forward and the people standing behind you, we can finally bring them down." The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting, "Justice! Justice!" once again. But Williams's prophecy still echoed in David's mind. His fists clenched as he turned to Daniel, who stood at his side. "Son, this fight isn't over. Taking Williams down was just the beginning. Are you ready for what comes next?" Daniel's eyes burned with determination. "I was ready the moment you told me the truth. Whatever storm is coming, we'll face it together." Tears threatened to blur David's vision, but he stood tall. "Then let's finish this." The bailiffs rolled in a monitor, displaying live footage from outside the courthouse. To their astonishment, the streets of New York were flooded with people, tens of thousands gathered, holding signs, chanting David's name. Helicopters buzzed overhead, capturing the sea of voices demanding justice. Emily Brooks narrated, her voice breaking with passion. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching a movement. The people have taken back the courtroom, and this man once homeless, once forgotten, has become their judge." David raised the gavel high. The room fell silent. Even the chants outside seemed to pause, as though the entire world was waiting for his words. "This is not just about one corrupt man," David declared, his voice booming across the chamber. "This is about every man, woman, and child who has ever been silenced by power. Today, the People's Court has spoken. Justice will no longer serve the few, it will serve us all." The gavel slammed down. Crack! The sound reverberated like thunder. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, tears streaming, fists raised in triumph. Reporters scrambled to broadcast his every word. Social media exploded with hashtags: People's Judge, Justice for All, Carter vs. Corruption. Within minutes, David Carter wasn't just a name, he was a symbol. But amid the celebration, David caught sight of Daniel. His son's smile was proud, but his eyes betrayed worry. The boy whispered, "Dad," Williams's words, "do you think he was telling the truth about something in your past?" David placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "The truth is never something to fear, Daniel. No matter what it is, we'll face it head on. Together." The boy nodded, gripping his father's hand tightly. The official stepped forward again. "Mr. Carter, would you be willing to continue presiding as a judge, at least temporarily, until the federal investigation concludes?" Gasps rippled through the room. David's breath caught. A man who once lived on the streets, humiliated and beaten in this very courthouse, now being asked to sit as its judge not just for today, but for tomorrow. He looked out at the crowd, at the people chanting his name, at the cameras broadcasting to millions across America. He thought of his years of pain, his struggles, his fight for survival. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, I will serve not as a judge for the powerful, but as a judge for the people." The courthouse shook with applause. Reporters screamed headlines into their microphones. Emily Brooks wept openly as she signed off her stream. History has been rewritten today. Justice doesn't wear a crown, it wears scars. And David Carter is living proof. Outside, fireworks exploded over the skyline, echoing like cannon fire against the skyscrapers. The people cheered as if a war had been won. Inside, David lifted the gavel once more, his son by his side. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel broken. He didn't feel homeless. He felt whole. And as the gavel fell one last time, America knew. The people finally had their judge.